Welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're going to be taking a look at a research paper about a technique called the bogus pipeline.
Yeah, it sounds kind of like something out of a spy movie, right?
Yeah, for sure.
But it's a method that some researchers use when they're trying to get accurate self-reported data,
Oh, okay.
especially for like behaviors that maybe people don't want to admit to, like alcohol or drug use.
Yeah, so that makes sense. Like, people aren't always going to be completely honest, right?
Yeah.
Especially if it's something that's taboo or whatever.
Right.
So how does the bogus pipeline work? What's the trick?
Well, basically, they tried to convince the participants that the researchers have like a way to detect lies,
Oh, wow.
almost like a super advanced lie detector.
Like a magic lie detector.
Yeah, they call it the bogus pipeline or sometimes BPL.
Oh, so it's not actually real. It's like a placebo lie detector
Well,
or something.
pretty much, yeah.
Yeah,
But the participants believe that it can uncover their deception.
right.
So the researchers will make it seem as scientific and convincing as possible.
Okay. So the logic is that if people believe they'll be caught, if they lie,
Yeah,
they're more likely to just answer honestly.
that's pretty clever. Does it actually work, though?
Well, that's what's interesting. We're diving into a 1995 study today by a Guinness.
Oh, how do you pronounce that?
It's like the beer, a Guinness,
Oh, okay.
Pearson Quigley, and they looked at whether the BPL actually led to more truthful self-reporting about alcohol and marijuana use.
So specifically for substance use.
Right.
Okay. Were there a lot of people in this study?
Actually, yeah, they did two meta-analyses.
Hold on. What's a meta-analysis?
Good question. A meta-analysis is when you take a bunch of different studies on the same topic.
Oh, okay.
So in this case, they looked at a bunch of studies that used the BPL technique.
Right.
And this let them look at the data from, get this, almost 6,500 participants.
Wow. That's a lot.
Yeah, much larger than a single study could provide.
Yeah, for sure. So what did they find with all that data? Okay, so for alcohol, they found that the BPL didn't actually lead to a significant increase in self-reported drinking?
Oh, really? So even if they thought that they could get caught?
Yeah,
Huh.
didn't really change anything.
That's surprising. You'd think people would fess up if they thought they were going to get caught in a lie.
Yeah, you would think.
What about for marijuana? Did they see different results there? What about for marijuana? Did they see different results there?
Yeah, so for marijuana, the results were a little bit different. The BPL did lead to a small increase in self-reported use,
Okay.
but the effect was still pretty small.
Okay, so a little bit of a mixed bag then.
Yeah.
It worked a little bit for marijuana, but not at all for alcohol.
Mhm.
Why do you think there was a difference?
Well, one thing to remember is this study was done back in 1995.
Oh, okay.
And back then, the social norms around alcohol and marijuana were pretty different, Like
Yeah.
drinking was just more accepted in general,
Right.
while marijuana use had like a much stronger stigma.
So maybe people weren't as worried about admitting to drinking, even if they thought they might get caught.
Right, exactly.
But with marijuana, there was more at stake socially.
Yeah,
So the threat of being found out might have had a bigger impact.
that's a really good point. And it really highlights like how the BPL's effectiveness might depend on how worried people are about the consequences of admitting to something.
Yeah.
And this raises a really interesting point about self-reporting.
What's that?
It's not just about like whether we think we'll get caught in a lie.
Right.
It's about how we like view the behavior itself.
Right.
If we're already okay with admitting to something,
Uh-huh.
a fake lie detector probably won't change our answer that much.
Right.
But if there's a lot of stigma around it or a fear of judgment,
Yeah.
that illusion of being caught, even if it's not real, it can be enough to change our answers.
That's so interesting. So the effectiveness of the bogus pipeline isn't just about the technique itself.
Right.
It's about how it interacts with our own perceptions and anxieties.
Yeah. Exactly.
It makes you wonder, if the bogus pipeline isn't perfect, are there other methods that researchers use to get better self-reported data?
Yeah, definitely. They have a few other tools in their kit.
Okay.
One technique is called the randomized response technique.
Oh, that sounds kind of complicated. How does that work?
It's actually pretty clever. So they give the participants a randomizing device,
Yeah.
like a coin to flip, and then depending on how it lands, they answer one of two questions.
Okay.
So one question is about the sensitive topic, and the other question is about something totally unrelated.
I think I see where this is going. So the researcher doesn't know which question they answered.
Exactly.
So it's like anonymous.
Right.
It protects them.
Exactly. It gives them that anonymity and lets them answer truthfully without worrying about, their response being linked back to them.
So it removes that pressure of judgment or whatever.
Right. Exactly.
That's really smart. Are there any other ways that researchers try to get around these limitations with self-reporting?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Sometimes the best way to get accurate data is to just completely move away from self-reporting
Okay.
and use what they call unobtrusive measures.
Unobtrusive measures.
Yeah, so basically it's ways to gather information without directly asking people to report on themselves.
So like spying on the, I'm kidding. But seriously, what would be an example of that?
No spying involved. Think more like saliva tests, to see if someone's used a substance recently.
Oh, right.
That's objective data that doesn't rely on memory or anything.
Right.
Or researchers might actually observe behavior in natural settings instead of relying on, like, what people say they do.
That makes a lot of sense. Sometimes actions speak louder than words.
For sure.
It seems like researchers have to get pretty creative
They do.
to get around these challenges.
Yeah, and there's one more technique I wanted to mention.
Okay.
Diaries and self-monitoring.
Okay, so they track their own actions,
Exactly.
like habits and stuff.
Yep, they keep detailed records of their own behavior over a period of time.
I can see how that could be really useful.
It can be. Of course, it has limitations. People aren't always the best at keeping up with things.
Right.
But it can still be a really useful way to gather more detailed data.
Than just asking them in an interview or survey.
Right, exactly.
Okay, so we've got randomized response techniques, we've got the unobtrusive measures like saliva tests and observation, and then we've got the diaries and self-monitoring.
Right.
Sounds like researchers have a lot of different ways to address these issues with self-reporting.
Yeah, and it's important to remember that there's no perfect solution.
Yeah.
The best approach usually involves using a few different methods to get a more complete picture.
Right, like trying to put together a puzzle.
Exactly. Each method has its strengths and weaknesses, right?
Yes.
So combining them can help overcome some of the limitations.
It's about finding the right tool for the job.
Pretty much.
So what's the main takeaway here for our listeners? What should people keep in mind when they see research that uses self-reported data?
I think the biggest thing is just to remember how complex self-reporting is.
Yeah.
It's not always easy to be totally honest, even if you want to be.
Right.
There's social pressure and fear of judgment.
Right.
And even our own memories can be unreliable sometimes.
So take it all with a grain of salt.
Yeah, exactly. You've got to be a critical consumer of information.
Right.
So when you see, headlines about new studies, especially about sensitive topics,
Yeah.
think about how they got that data,
Okay.
Did they use self-reporting? If so, did they try to make sure it was accurate?
Right.
Did they use more than one method to back up their findings?
That's a really good point. It's kind of like anything else. Don't just take things at face value.
Right.
Dig a little deeper, ask some questions, and be aware of any potential biases.
Exactly.
That's how we can interpret findings more accurately and make better decisions based on that information.
I think that's a great point to end on.
Yeah, research is super interesting.
Definitely.
But you got to stay critical.
Yeah, a healthy amount of skepticism is always good.
Well said. All right, well, that wraps up our deep dive into the bogus pipeline and the challenges of self-reporting. Thanks for listening.